Some relationships don't break with loud arguments. They dissolve quietly. Each time we are forgotten, a compliment may sound sweet, yet somehow makes us feel small. A harmless joke, repeated, begins to chip away at our dignity, and so we begin to doubt, not just others, but ourselves. This isn't a video meant to teach you to mistrust everyone. It's a reminder. Observe with reason, not react with emotion, for harm does not come from others. It comes from how we allow them to affect us. Today, we'll uncover 7 subtle signs that someone may secretly dislike you while pretending otherwise. And more importantly, we'll learn how to remain calm, self-possessed, and mentally sovereign. We don't need revenge, we need growth. 1. When jokes stop being funny. Some relationships seem close on the surface, yet slowly erode the inner life of those involved through words that appear harmless. One of the most insidious forms of disrespect comes cloaked in humor. Jokes, repeated over time, aimed at your flaws. At first you might laugh, or at least try to, just to keep the peace. But over time, when those words become a tradition, every time you meet, when the other person keeps turning some part of you, your body, your speech, your background, or a past mistake, into a punchline, something within you begins to sense that something isn't right. The issue isn't that they joked once, but that the repetition becomes a pattern, deliberately targeting the places where you are most vulnerable. When a joke is used as a tool to constantly expose your weaknesses in front of others, it no longer aims to amuse. It becomes a form of psychological manipulation. It's how someone quietly places themselves above you, keeping you in a reactive state, drawing attention to your insecurities, dimming the light of what you truly bring to the table. They don't need to insult you outright. They just make sure others laugh whenever your name comes up. When this goes on long enough, the person on the receiving end starts to question themselves. Maybe I'm just too sensitive, they think, and so they go quiet, become accommodating, or even start making fun of themselves, just to prove they are easygoing. But in truth, this is a defense mechanism, one that forms when someone's trying not to be hurt again. Going along with these jokes doesn't make you stronger. It makes you forget that respect is the foundation of any healthy connection. What is troubling isn't just the one making the joke, but also the people around them, the ones who laugh, or worse, stay silent. Group culture often enables harmful humor when no one speaks up, and when you say nothing, you silently accept the role of harmless target in the conversation. That makes the behavior easier to repeat and harder for you to step away without being labeled too serious or can't take a joke. In moments like these, the right response isn't anger or trying to joke back as revenge, because by doing that, you're still playing the game you're trying to leave. What matters is recognizing the behavior for what it is, objectively, without emotional charge, without overreaction, just seeing it plainly as fact. A person who repeatedly jokes about your weaknesses isn't simply unaware of boundaries. They are securing their own position by making you seem small in the eyes of others. It's intentional, and your awareness is what keeps you from getting trapped in the cycle. Watch how they react when you stop laughing, when you stay silent and don't encourage the joke, or when you calmly say that you don't find it funny. These are small tests, but they reveal everything. A respectful person will pause and apologize. A disrespectful one will push further, or worse, blame you for not knowing how to have fun. Ending this pattern doesn't require harshness or conflict. It only takes one act. Stop receiving it the same way. You don't need to explain. You don't need to escalate. You simply change your response. That is the first step toward resetting your boundaries, and the first reminder to yourself that you deserve respect, even in moments wrapped in laughter. When a joke no longer makes you smile, maybe it's time to stop. Not because you're weak, but because you're finally strong enough to no longer let someone hurt you under the guise of just kidding. 2. Praise meant to belittle. Not every compliment is rooted in goodwill. In many cases, praise is used as a veil, disguising sarcasm or worse, subtle contempt. These are the kinds of remarks that leave you confused, unsure whether to feel appreciated or insulted. Phrases like, "I'm surprised you pulled it off," or "that outfit really makes you look slimmer." On the surface, they sound like encouragement or positive feedback, but on closer inspection, there's an undertone of diminishment, as if you weren't expected to do well or don't usually meet that standard. These remarks are often called backhanded compliments, and they can strike deeper than direct criticism because they blur your emotional response and make it hard to know how to react. This behavior isn't accidental. In most cases, the speaker knows exactly what they're planning. Doubt, discomfort, and a subtle sense of inferiority. Without ever saying anything overtly negative, they keep their tone friendly, approachable, and can easily deny any ill intent if confronted. That's what makes these comments so hard to challenge. If you speak up, you risk being labeled too sensitive or unable to take a compliment. It's a form of passive aggression, where the weapon is a sugar-coated phrase, and the target is your confidence, undermined without leaving a visible mark. In the workplace, this kind of praise is especially common, particularly where quiet rivalries or unspoken competition exist. A colleague might say, "You did a better job on that report than I expected. Someone must have helped you." It sounds like recognition, but subtly discredits your effort by suggesting your success wasn't really yours. On the surface, the speaker can hide behind the excuse of simply being complimentary, while the receiver is left in a bind. Stay silent and be quietly diminished, or speak up and be seen as petty. This form of communication creates a persistent tension. It doesn't erupt into open conflict, but it leaves a lasting residue in the mind. Over time, repeated instances of belittling praise begin to chip away at self-belief. You start to wonder, am I really competent? Or does everyone think I don't deserve this? And from there, your confidence starts to erode, until every piece of feedback, good or bad, feels like a potential threat. In personal relationships, backhanded compliments often serve as a means of psychological control. A partner might say, "I'm honestly surprised you cooked well today." That's right. The point isn't to acknowledge your effort. It's to reinforce the idea that you usually fall short. This creates an imbalance where one person assumes the role of evaluator and the other is left constantly proving their worth. One clear sign that a compliment isn't rooted in respect is how it makes you feel. Genuine praise brings ease, affirmation, and clarity. Praise with a hidden agenda, however, creates unease without giving you anything solid to confront. And that ambiguity is what makes it dangerous. You can't point to a clear offense, but you still sense something's wrong. Over time, you begin to question your own perception. And that's when the manipulation has taken hold. Not everyone who gives these kinds of compliments does so with bad intent. But when someone repeatedly delivers double-edged remarks, constantly expresses surprise at your success, or speaks in a tone loaded with implication, it may be a sign they don't truly respect you. In these moments, the key isn't whether to fight back. It's whether you can stay lucid enough to see what's really happening, because true validation doesn't come wrapped in ambiguity. It's reflected in how you live, how you carry yourself, and in the quiet consistency of your character. 3. When you're left out of the plan, being excluded from a plan, a gathering, or a group activity rarely makes noise, but it leaves a lingering ache. It's not a direct rejection. No one tells you that you can't be part of it, but by not mentioning you, not inviting you, or only informing you once everything is done, others send a clear message without needing to say a word. You no longer belong in the shared picture. The feeling of being sidelined often arrives like this: quiet, cold, and without explanation. In many cases, this is masked by seemingly reasonable excuses. I thought you were busy. I assumed you weren't interested. Or, it slipped my mind. These explanations usually come after you realize you were the only one not invited, or after an event has passed without your knowledge. As gentle as they may sound, these justifications don't erase the fact that you were excluded, and it wasn't accidental. When a pattern repeats often enough, it stops being an oversight. It becomes a choice. Being left out of a plan isn't just about missing an event. It's a sign that your presence is fading from the lives of certain individuals or groups in relationships that were once close. It may be a clear signal that something is shifting. You're no longer the first person they think of, or perhaps not someone they think of at all. This breeds inner confusion, prompting questions like, did I do something wrong? Why didn't they say anything? Do I still matter in this relationship? This quiet form of exclusion strikes at the core of belonging, a fundamental human need. When left out, people tend to review their past interactions, searching for clues. Every unanswered message, every last-minute cancellation, every time you were forgotten, starts to feel suspicious. The sense of isolation doesn't come from one major event, but from a buildup of small, silent signals lacking clarity. In some cases, the exclusion is subtle. The person still chats with you normally, still engages on social media, but when something meaningful happens, they don't tell you. This gives the illusion that the relationship is intact, while emotionally, you're being edged out. It's a form of quiet disconnection, hard to detect, harder to confront, because you lack evidence to ask questions and no clear reason to express the pain. At times, the person being excluded tries to justify the behavior by blaming themselves. They think maybe they're not interesting enough, not useful, or don't fit in. Yet in most situations, being left out says less about your worth and more about someone else's shifting priorities and emotional distance. The truth is, people change, relationships evolve, and sometimes being written out of someone's story says nothing about you. It just means you no longer fit the vision they're pursuing. This quiet exclusion, though not aggressive or overt, still leaves a lasting impact on one's self-perception. It can lead people to withdraw, become cautious in new connections, or second-guess every social interaction. What's important to note is that the pain doesn't come from a single act, but from the growing gap between someone's behavior and the expectations you once held. The greater the gap, the deeper the hurt. In reality, you can't always prevent being left out of plans or social circles, but learning to recognize the signs and refusing to blame yourself is essential for protecting your inner balance. When your absence goes unnoticed, or worse, unacknowledged, it's not a cue to try harder for approval. It's a signal to redirect your energy toward relationships where your presence genuinely matters. 4. They're only busy with you. When someone frequently turns down your invitation citing being busy, yet seems readily present in the lives of others, the issue is no longer about time. Time is impartial. It grants the same 24 hours to everyone. How people allocate it reveals what truly matters to them. So if someone is always too busy when you reach out, yet finds time for others, then the problem isn't their calendar. It's your position on their list of priorities. Busyness can be real. Modern life demands much. Careers, families, social obligations, self-care, but no one is perpetually overwhelmed all the time. If someone consistently tells you they are drowning in responsibilities, while you see them sharing photos from gatherings, cafe outings, or meetups with others, that sends a clear message. They don't want to make time for you. At that point, the rejection isn't logistical. It's emotional and intentional. These refusals often come dressed in politeness, softened to avoid offense. They might say, "This month is hectic, maybe next month," or "This week's been overwhelming. Let's reschedule." Such words offer temporary comfort, leaving you hopeful the bond is still intact, that this is just a passing phase. But when the delays stretch over weeks and months and only apply to you, it's time to face the truth. What seemed like postponement is, in fact, a quiet, repeated, and deliberate form of distancing. This wears on the one receiving it. Being repeatedly turned down prompts questions of self-worth. Am I asking too much? Am I not interesting enough to be a priority? Why am I always the last choice? These thoughts erode confidence and undermine the sense of security within the relationship, especially in instances that were once close. The shift in priority feels like a loss, even when there's no official goodbye. In some cases, the other person remains outwardly warm, replying to messages, using cheerful emojis, showing no signs of coldness. Yet when it comes to concrete actions, scheduling time, meeting in person, offering help, they are always unable, caught up, or will get back to you. This disconnect between words and actions creates a silent gap, where the one affected feels unable to name the sadness, because there's no clear fault to point to. The relationship lingers in ambiguity, not quite broken, not quite alive. Sometimes this constant busyness is used as a subtle way to manage distance without confrontation. When someone no longer wishes to maintain a relationship at its previous depth, but avoids being direct, they opt to reduce contact gradually. This selective busyness allows them to remain polite while shrinking the bond without explanation. It leaves the other person grasping for clarity, with nothing solid to respond to. Being consistently placed outside someone's priorities doesn't just bruise the heart, it teaches avoidance. The affected person may stop reaching out, pull back communication, or detach altogether to protect their dignity. Silence begins to form, not from conflict, but from a quiet accumulation of unspoken disappointment. And eventually, the relationship fades, not because both wanted it to, but because one was always too busy when the other needed them most. 5. The silent distance in action. Not all distance is created with words. Some distance appears quietly, yet unmistakably, through small repeated actions. When someone consistently avoids physical closeness, not only through silence, but in one language, by not shaking hands, avoiding eye contact, keeping physical distance, or shifting their seat when you enter the room, this is not accidental. The human body instinctively leans toward what feels safe and pulls away from what feels unsettling. When even the most basic gestures of connection are systematically withdrawn, it often reflects a deeper emotional shift. In social relationships, even the smallest forms of physical contact, a tap on the shoulder, a light pat on the back, or a proper handshake, convey nonverbal signals of trust, goodwill, and connection. When someone who once offered these gestures becomes hesitant, cold, or avoids them entirely, the shift should not be ignored, especially when this change is directed solely at you, while they remain warm and engaging with others. The distance is no longer random, but a deliberate choice. One of the clearest signs of emotional detachment is when someone minimizes their physical presence around you. They might adjust their stance while speaking, cross their arms as a subtle shield, or angle their body away, even in direct conversation. In group settings, they avoid sitting near you, avert their gaze, and when physical contact is unavoidable, they approach it with stiffness and obligation. These changes are rarely spoken aloud, but they register, leaving you with a growing sense of isolation and disconnect. Body language carries more weight than speech. A turned back, a limp handshake, a glance that quickly looks away. These can speak louder than rejection itself. These gestures are hard to dismiss as misunderstandings because their repetition forms a new pattern, a quiet barrier designed to keep distance. When someone no longer seeks basic physical connection, they are sending a clear message. Something has shifted, whether it's trust lost, discomfort felt, or negative feelings left unspoken. Sensing this kind of distance, especially when no conflict has occurred, can leave one confused. There is no clear explanation, no open conversation to clear the air. Only small changes in posture, eye contact, and species, but together, they leave behind a growing void in every interaction. The one affected begins to wonder, did I do something wrong? Is something happening that I don't know about? This creates a sense of hesitation and guardedness. Notably, in many cases, the other person remains formally polite. They're not rude. They don't cause conflict. They greet you and exchange words when necessary, but everything is reduced to bare minimums, devoid of the natural ease that once existed. They no longer touch your shoulder in greeting, don't smile when catching your eye, and avoid standing near you in group conversations. The absence of small familiar contact gradually becomes the unmistakable presence of emotional distance. When the behaviors that once built connection are withdrawn, the other person in the relationship tends to adapt. They initiate less, pull back on interaction, and slowly retreat to avoid the sting of subtle rejection. This unintentionally creates a quiet loop. Distance breeds silence. Silence deepens distance. And if neither side takes the step to break that cycle, the relationship begins to fade, not from dramatic conflict, but from countless quiet gestures left unspoken and unresolved. 6. When you fall, they disappear. A person's presence during your darkest moments often speaks louder than any words or gestures they've offered before. When life is smooth, when you are thriving, when success is visible and energy is high, there will always be people eager to stand by you. They'll share your joy, celebrate your wins, and appear friendly and attentive. But when life turns, when hardship strikes, when you suffer loss, failure, or collapse, that's when truth begins to surface. In those moments, some people will quietly disappear. They go silent when you need someone to listen. They claim to be busy when you reach out for help. They keep a safe distance when your emotions are no longer neat and predictable. Not all disappearances stem from malice. Some people simply don't know how to handle someone else's pain. Some are uncomfortable witnessing vulnerability, sorrow, or defeat. They may fear being drawn into negativity or lack the emotional capacity to stay present during chaos. Yet regardless of their reasons, their absence in the moments you need them most leaves a lasting mark. It changes how you view the relationship, forcing you to question the sincerity of connections you once believed were unshakable. At your lowest, you don't need someone to solve everything. What truly matters is presence. A simple message, a short call, even a silent moment of shared space. These are enough to remind you that you're not alone. But when even those small gestures are absent, you begin to realize you're standing alone in the storm. People who once appeared daily vanish without trace. Those who once claimed to care now go silent. And within that silence, what you feel most isn't pain, it's clarity. Some relationships only exist when they're not truly needed. When someone disappears during your collapse, it isn't just physical absence. It's emotional withdrawal. They no longer initiate contact, ask how you're doing, or respond to what you share. They continue their lives as usual, post cheerful updates, engage with others, yet deliberately ignore your reality. Sometimes they remain in the same space, same workplace, same friend group, but act as if nothing has happened. That indifference wounds more than absence ever could, because it proves your suffering isn't even worth acknowledging. This kind of withdrawal in times of crisis leaves deep psychological scars. It's not just hurt, it's disillusionment. You lose trust in people. You retreat, speak less, hesitate to open up again. The emotional void you are forced to endure teaches you to stand on your own, not because you chose solitude, but because you were left with no one else. Realizing that some people only show up when life is easy forces you to reevaluate everything you once trusted, especially in relationships built on closeness. This kind of absence during crisis creates a fracture that is hard to mend. It's not caused by betrayal or a single event, but by prolonged silence, exactly when presence mattered most. The relationship may continue on the surface, but it will never be the same, because once you've felt the sting of abandonment in your most fragile moment, you will never look at that person the same way again. And sometimes distance begins there, not out of anger, but because your perception has changed forever. 7. When they mention you in your absence. One of the most quietly damaging forms of betrayal in relationships is becoming the subject of conversation when you're not there. When someone chooses to talk about you in spaces where you can't speak for yourself, can't offer truth, or provide your own perspective, it opens the door to distortion, misunderstanding, and a version of you shaped solely by another's narrative. The danger doesn't lie only in what is said, but in your absence, which removes the balance needed for truth to remain intact. Talking about someone behind their back isn't always malicious, but when the words lean toward judgment, criticism, mockery, or the sharing of personal details in a suggestive tone, it becomes a form of harm, even if the person being discussed never hears it directly. In these conversations, the storyteller often emphasizes flaws, highlights missteps, or retells events in a way that frames the other unfavorably. Phrases like, "I don't mean to gossip, but oh," or "just sharing this so you can learn from it," may sound harmless, but they pave the way for negativity to spread. This behavior creates a social space where the absent person becomes subject to judgment without ever being notified. Every detail shared in their absence becomes a fragment of the image others begin to form, sometimes one that is completely misaligned with who they truly are. And when these conversations repeat, that image solidifies as truth in the minds of listeners, regardless of the fact that the person being judged was never allowed to correct the record. Learning you've been talked about behind your back inflicts a psychological wound. Nothing fractures trust more deeply than realizing someone you once confided in is sharing your story without your knowledge or consent. The sense of betrayal doesn't come from a specific act, but from the breakdown of the relationship from within. Trust, the foundation of every human bond, shakes, and from its cracks grow suspicion and caution in future relationships. A more subtle form of this behavior is when someone doesn't speak against you directly, but silently allows or even encourages others to do so. They stay quiet while you are criticized, offer no defense, perhaps even smile or nod in tacit agreement. This silent complicity carries as much weight as spoken words. When someone won't defend your dignity in your absence, it reflects a lack of loyalty and shows that you are not someone they feel the need to stand by. In some cases, those who speak behind your back act warm and kind to your face. They compliment you, check in, and show apparent concern, yet wear a different mask the moment you are gone. The disconnect between how they treat you publicly and how they speak of you privately creates unease and distrust. You begin to wonder what's real in the relationship. And once that doubt sets in, trust is difficult to fully restore. Realizing you've become the subject of private conversations often causes people to grow cautious. They speak less, share less, and build walls to protect themselves from further pain. It's a quiet response to what seems like a small act, talking about someone when they're not present. But its impact on emotional safety and trust can last for years. In daily life, none of us can avoid facing relationships that aren't as whole as we once believed. I used to think that closeness, frequent conversations, and being there when it matters were clear signs of lasting friendship. But reality shows that words and hearts don't always align. There were moments I found myself needing a simple gesture, a word of encouragement, a quiet presence to feel less alone. But instead there was silence, apologies of being too busy, and a growing distance no one bothered to explain. At first I reacted emotionally, disappointment, anger, then self-blame. But the deeper I studied Stoic philosophy, the more I learned to see things as they are, not as I hoped they would be. I gradually understood that how others treat me speaks to their character, not my worth. And more importantly, no one can take away my inner peace unless I give them permission to. In practice, I began acknowledging negative emotions as they arose, then asking myself, is this within my control? If it isn't, I let it go. I no longer cling to relationships that leave me questioning someone's sincerity. I choose to live with clarity, to act with kindness, but without letting that kindness become a space for others to take advantage. Every time I'm ignored, left out, or spoken of behind my back, instead of reacting, I observe, and that observation strengthens me each day, not by conquering anyone, but by refusing to let anyone disturb my inner stillness again. If this video resonated with you or stirred something within, consider supporting the channel by liking, subscribing, and turning on notifications so we can continue walking this path together toward a steadier, stronger inner life. Thank you for your time, and never forget, you deserve a peaceful life, even when the world around you is full of noise. See you in the next video.